Hey everybody, it's Jenny Clark with Solvability. We've got another Freedom Friday this week. And what I'm talking about today is one of my favorite subjects, wrap rates. Wrap rates are all about how do you price the services you're offering, because what you're asking is, okay, I'm going to pay an employee X dollars. How much do I bill my customer? It depends on what kind of benefits you're offering, or is it competitive? What is the range that your customer is expecting? How much of it is negotiable? All of those things are part of it. So I'm going to switch to a slide to talk a little bit about these different wrap rates. Okay, so when we talk about understanding wrap rates, I'm going to put you through a bunch of accounting stuff, but really it's pretty straightforward math that you might have used as a project manager. You're thinking things through, but my main goal here is to make sure I'm talking to you about what you need to know to make money in government contracting, because you're putting so much energy and effort to it. I want to make sure you're getting something back so you'll have the money, the profit, the cash flow to grow. So what is a wrap rate? There's different terms for a wrap rate. And when you start being in meetings with people, they'll talk about different things. They'll use different terminology. You're like, I think they're talking about a billing rate, but I'm not sure. Sometimes they'll express it as something called a multiplier. And when you hear that, they'll say, what's your wrap rate? And you'll give a number. You'll say, oh, $97 an hour. They say, really? Mine's 1.7. Mathematically, it's kind of the same thing, but you really need to understand a little bit. But to me, a wrap rate is your all-in price. That's what you're going to charge your client for each hour of time. So a lot of times I like to give people an example. If you're having somebody drop a trademark for you, it's a law firm, they're going to send you at the end of every month an itemized bill that has half an hour of an attorney, and you're going to go, this bill for half an hour is $750. Well, what does that mean? That means their wrap rate, their billing rate's $1,500 an hour. Well, government contracting, your rate's not going to be that high, but I just wanted to give you an example. Sometimes you'll hire a consultant to help you. Maybe they're billing you $200 an hour. The hourly billing rate and the wrap rate usually mean the same thing. It's whatever you're going to charge to your customer. Usually it's associated with labor categories. In government contracting, you tend to bid by labor category because they want to specify what the qualifications are of the people that are doing the work. So a project manager, a program manager, a senior engineer, a database administrator, a junior analyst. There can be all kinds of categories. And usually along with those categories, when you're bidding, it'll specify exactly what they're expecting, like how many years experience of a project manager. Do they have to have a background in radar? Senior engineer, database administrator. So you'll see that you have to go through a process of mapping what your customer is asking for and map it to the people you've got and see how their resume fits in with it. And you'll usually have to submit resumes as well. There'll be job titles described in a proposal, but whatever you see in that proposal, keep it called the same thing. If they're calling it a program manager, you shouldn't call it a project manager. Call it exactly what they called it. Sometimes you'll have internal job titles that you want to map out. Every project or every proposal RFP is going to come out with something different. And you really just want to be thinking about, I want to describe this person as the RFP or the request for proposal describes it, because otherwise you're going to be mixing up apples and oranges. You're not going to have the result you want. You typically use average pay rates and then a multiplier to cover indirect cost and profit. So let's say you've got somebody that you're paying $80,000 a year, roughly $40 an hour. Well, you're thinking, okay, that's what I pay the person, but I've got to pay payroll taxes. I've got vacation, sick, and holiday. I've got benefits. I've got the cost of running the office, spent money on recruiting them. Sometimes I have to get security clearances. All of those things are called indirect costs. You need to cover those support costs as well. And you got to make a little bit of profit, or else why are you doing all this work? Here are some other names for wrap rates. Sometimes they'll call it a loaded labor rate. Loaded usually means that it's the direct labor plus fringe and overhead and G&A, sometimes profit, sometimes not profit. So you always want to get clarification. Some people will call it a fully burdened rate. And a burden is an accounting term, meaning what we add on top of a basic cost. So just like if you were, going to the mall and you're buying yourself a Tesla at the mall, the cost of the Tesla might be in your mind, well, it's just the cost of the parts that went into the Tesla, but they're going to charge you for the cost of the showroom, the cost of the engineering, the cost of shipping it, the owner's manual. They've got to recover that in these burdens. So it's never just the cost of the parts for the cars, right? Fully loaded rate, same thing. Billing rates, the same thing. You do want to clarify when you're doing these type biddings whether you're supposed to include the fee or profit or not included. What I'm seeing a lot now is if you're a subcontractor or a teammate on a project, sometimes what they'll say is, we want you to provide your fully burdened rate. And you say, does that include fee? They'll say, no. Make sure you get that right. And what they usually are saying is, well, we've decided that everybody's going to get 3% profit. And you have to decide if it's worth the effort to go after a project where you're only going to make 3% profit. But let me tell you this, it's better to have work than not have work. So if it's covering all your costs, that's okay. It's getting you in the door with that customer. It's getting you past performance with that agency. Sometimes a low profit is okay. But in government contracting, you're going to make 3 to 10% profit. You're not going to make massive profit unless you're an intelligence analyst in a unique area with special niche skills that you're the only person in the world that can do that. You're going to have less competition at that level. You might be able to demand a higher rate. So I always like to start with some definitions. Direct labor is what you pay your employees. That's not subcontractors and not consultants. Many times people will talk about, well, I've got somebody that they're a 1099 employee. That doesn't exist. They're either an employee that you pay Social Security and Medicare tax on, give them a W-2 at the end of the year, or they're not. And so subs and consultants, they're not your employees. They might be part of your team, but they're not your employees. So their direct labor, that's usually their hourly pay rate. So a few minutes ago, I mentioned $80,000 a year. When I divided that by 2,080 hours, which is 52 weeks a year times 40 hours a week, that's around $40 an hour. So you should be kind of mathematically in your head knowing what these are. It is the annual salary divided by 2080. And here's the tricky part. When you start responding to RFPs, a lot of times they'll tell you how many hours you're supposed to bid. And what they really mean by that, a lot of times inside the request for proposal, it'll say, we want you to bid 1944 hours or 1880 hours. And what they're usually doing is saying, well, we know that sometime of the year, your employees will be on holiday pay, or they might be on vacation, they might have sick leave. And so we're allowing a certain amount for leave. You've got to be consistent in how you bid it, or else you're going to overbid because you're going to bid too many hours. There's so many tricks in government contracting. You got to learn them all and be ready to think it through and see how it's going to work, because it can be very confusing and you're not really going to get help from other people that will tell you the secret answer, because it's like government contracting requires a secret decoder ring. You got to develop your own. You also want to consider, when you're pricing your direct labor, the specific employees that you might have to meet that labor category, but you can also mix in that the employees you've got and some new hires. So here's a trick. You might have an engineer that you're paying $40 an hour, but you're looking at the labor category and you're looking for the qualifications. And, well, Ed's been with us 6 years. And over time, we've paid him more because he's such a versatile employee, super skilled. Normally, if I went out and hired for this position, I'm only paid 32. You can actually bid new hires into that and bid them at a lower rate. And all we're doing is mathematically dropping the average. So if you only had 2 people, instead of bidding $40 an hour, it'd be 40 plus 32, which is 72 divided by 2 is $36 an hour. These are games other people play, so you'll want to learn them too. What cost do you include in the wrap rate? Think about all the costs that you're spending. Okay, first off, obviously, you have the employee pay for when they're working on the contract, but you've also got payroll taxes and benefits, right? Got to pay that on everybody. You've also got the cost of if you have to provide them a laptop or a connection to the internet or an email address, or sometimes you'll have access for them to computers that you're using or your network. Sometimes they're inside your building and they're office space required. You had a lot of money that you had to spend on recruiting them. You might have human resources involved with onboarding them, bringing them on payroll and billing. You've also got the cost to get these new contracts. Executive pay, make sure you count yourself in. And then your profit, you need to have some profit over and above what you're spending so you have the cash flow to grow. So those are all the costs that you need to be including in a wrap rate. I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about pay scales and incentives. The reason this is so important is it's really going to depend on the kind of work you're going after, what it's going to cost you to bring people on, how are you going to retain them, how are you going to attract them, how are you going to say you should come to work for me instead of working for another company, because the job market is so tight these days. People are looking for, do I have a career path? When am I going to grow? When can I expect to have a pay increase? How do I get a bump? Those things are all very important. So let's talk about them all. Pay scales and salaries. When you're bidding on federal work, you usually have to do some research to figure out what the going rate is in your area. What bothers me about bidding these big contracts is they're not going to tell you where you're going to do the work. The pay scale in New York City is a lot different than it is in Lexington, Kentucky, or Dallas, Texas. So how do you pick which one you want? What I usually tell people is pick this pay scale of, if you were to win this work, where you think those employees would be, and don't accept work that you're working outside that state or location because you didn't price it for that. You priced it for you where you want to be working. Do they have a clearance? Is it current? Do you have to renew it? Would you have time where you've got to have people on the bench while you're waiting for their security clearance to come in? Those are all questions that we need to be asking. So that's part of it. Certifications. Do they have to have NIST certification? Do they have to have certain Microsoft certifications? That's going to cost money. Usually you want to hire somebody that already has it, but sometimes you may end up saying, I'm going to develop this employee, so I'm going to pay for some of that certification. Cybersecurity, way up there on the list, and so many companies that are working in federal are working in IT area. They're having to get CMMC certified for the cybersecurity maturity model at different levels. And the more you go in that area, the more skills you have to have, and the more that it's going to be important to you. So you definitely want to have a way that you can qualify what you're going to charge for them and make sure that you're covering that cost. Recruitment is a big cost right now. You know, it's one thing if you know a bunch of people and they're always calling you and asking, how do I come on? It's another thing if you've got to spend a lot of money on putting it on clearance jobs or USA jobs or one of those to bring them on. Bonuses. If you're in a competitive job market, some people say, well, I'll come on, but I need a $3,000 bonus. Well, that's not usually considered part of the cost of the contract. It comes out of your overhead, the support costs. You got to price that into your cost. Retention. You know, it's so much easier if you can keep the people you've got happy rather than having to go out and replace them, because otherwise you're spending all your time as the manager of the company, as the executive of the company saying, you know, we just get this guy trained. We just get him happy with the customer. We just get to the customer where they finally release the credentials so they can get to work. They've only been on the job for 6 months. They called me up and said, I'm going to a new job. Well, the downtime you have, the time that it takes to replace that employee is a lot of money, a lot of costs. You want to keep that in mind. And then lastly is the career path of it. So these are all parts of the things to be keeping in mind. Those are the first components of the wrap rate that I wanted to cover. And so I'm going to cut it off right now for our session today. And I'll save this in the recording because just in a few minutes, we're going to start our follow-on session that we call the Mitch Group.